Europe is filled with islands people travel across the world to visit. Resorts, beaches, fishing villages, and quiet coastlines attract millions every year. But not every island wants visitors. Scattered across Europe are islands hidden behind military restrictions, disease warnings, environmental protections, and dangerous histories that never fully disappeared. Some were contaminated. Some became isolated by choice. And some are surrounded by rules so strict that stepping onto them without permission could get you arrested, or far worse. These are 7 forbidden islands in Europe that most people will never be allowed to visit. Number 7. Gruinard Island, Scotland. Off the northwest coast of Scotland lies a small island that remained forbidden for nearly half a century because of one terrifying reason: anthrax. During World War II, the British government used Gruinard Island for military experiments involving biological weapons. Scientists wanted to study how anthrax would spread and survive, and sheep placed on the island became part of the testing. The results were so dangerous that contamination remained in the soil long after the experiments ended. Authorities declared the island unsafe, quarantine warnings were issued, and access became heavily restricted for decades. What makes Gruinard unsettling is how ordinary it looks from a distance. Green hills rise above the water, birds move across the shoreline, and nothing visually suggests what happened there. Yet beneath that calm appearance was one of the most dangerous contamination zones in Britain. Cleanup operations eventually took place years later, and officials declared the island safe again, but the reputation never disappeared completely. Even today, Gruinard still carries the feeling of a place marked by something invisible. Most islands become known for attracting life. This one became famous because people were told to stay away from it entirely. Number 6. Poveglia Island, Italy. In the Venetian lagoon, hidden between Venice and Lido, sits an island surrounded by stories dark enough to make even locals uneasy. Poveglia Island has become one of Europe's most infamous abandoned places, partly because of its history and partly because of the myths that grew around it afterward. During outbreaks of plague centuries ago, infected people and quarantine victims were reportedly sent there to be isolated from the rest of Venice. Later, parts of the island were used for medical purposes, including a psychiatric hospital that operated during the 20th century. Over time, rumors of suffering, strange events, and unexplained stories transformed Poveglia into something larger than history alone. Officially, many of the ghost stories surrounding the island remain unverified, but the atmosphere is real enough. Crumbling buildings, overgrown courtyards, broken hospital rooms, and silent bell towers create the feeling that time stopped there long ago. Access to the island is heavily restricted, and ordinary tourism is limited. Boats pass nearby, but few people ever step onto the island itself. What makes Poveglia forbidden is not only law or restriction, it is the reputation. The place became so associated with fear and death that even people living nearby often avoid talking about it for too long. Number 5. Surtsey, Iceland. Unlike most islands on Earth, Surtsey did not exist until the 1960s. Rising suddenly from volcanic eruptions off the southern coast of Iceland, the island became one of the newest pieces of land ever observed forming in real time. Smoke, lava, ash, and steam pushed upward from beneath the Atlantic Ocean until a completely new island emerged from the sea. But instead of turning it into a tourist attraction, authorities made an unusual decision. Access would remain extremely restricted. Scientists wanted to study how life naturally colonizes new land without major human interference. Plants, birds, insects, and ecosystems could develop in their purest possible form if people stayed away. That decision transformed Surtsey into one of the most protected islands in Europe. Only approved researchers are allowed to visit under strict conditions, and even they must follow careful rules to avoid contaminating the environment. At first glance, the island looks harsh and almost lifeless, with dark volcanic terrain surrounded by cold ocean. But scientifically, It became one of the most valuable natural laboratories on Earth. What makes Surtsey strange is that humans finally created a completely new island and then intentionally refused to let most humans touch it. Number 4. Rockall Atlantic Ocean. Far out in the North Atlantic stands a tiny isolated rock surrounded by rough seas so violent that simply reaching it can become dangerous. Rockall is not a traditional island with forests, towns, or beaches. It is a narrow rocky outcrop rising from the ocean hundreds of miles from mainland Britain and Ireland. Yet despite its size, Rockall became the center of political claims, survival stories, and extreme isolation. Waves regularly crash against it with enormous force, storms dominate the surrounding waters, and there is almost no shelter at all. Very few people have ever spent significant time there because conditions are brutally unforgiving. In some ways, Rockall feels less like land and more like a challenge against the Atlantic itself. Access is naturally restricted not through fences or guards, but through geography. The ocean protects it better than any military force could. What makes Rockall fascinating is the sheer loneliness of it. Looking at photographs of the rock surrounded by endless water creates the feeling that it should not even matter, yet humans still argued over it, studied it, and attempted to survive on it. It remains one of the strangest isolated locations connected to Europe. Number 3. Spinalonga, Greece. Off the coast of Crete lies a small fortified island surrounded by blue Mediterranean water that looks peaceful from a distance. But for decades, Spinalonga carried a reputation that made people fear being sent there. Originally built as a Venetian fortress, the island later became one of Europe's most famous leper colonies. During the early 20th century, people diagnosed with leprosy in Greece were often transported there and separated from the rest of society. Families were broken apart, futures disappeared overnight, and the island became a place associated with permanent isolation. What makes Spinalonga unsettling is the contrast between appearance and history. Under bright sunlight, the stone walls and sea views can look almost beautiful. Yet behind those walls existed a community formed by exile and survival. Residents tried to create ordinary lives despite knowing they had been removed from the outside world. Homes, shops, and social spaces slowly developed inside the colony, transforming the island into something far more complex than a prison. Today, visitors can legally enter certain parts, but many areas remain protected or restricted, and the emotional weight of the island never fully disappeared. Walking through abandoned streets surrounded by calm ocean creates a strange contradiction. Everything looks peaceful now, but the silence feels heavy, as if the island still remembers why people were sent there in the first place. Number 2. Fort Boyard, France. Rising from the sea between the French islands of Aix and Alerin stands a massive stone fortress that looks almost unreal against the water around it. Fort Boyard was originally designed as a military structure intended to protect strategic coastal routes, but construction difficulties and changing military technology turned the project into something stranger over time. Built directly on a sandbank in open water, the fortress appears isolated from everything around it, surrounded by waves on all sides with no natural land connection. From a distance, it resembles a giant floating prison more than a fort. The structure later gained fame through television, but access to the actual fortress remains heavily controlled. Most people only see it from boats passing nearby. What makes Fort Boyard feel forbidden is its location. Unlike castles built into landscapes, this fortress was placed directly into the ocean itself, creating the sense that it exists outside ordinary space. Harsh weather, crashing waves, and years of exposure gave the structure a weathered appearance that only adds to the atmosphere. Looking at it raises an immediate question. Why would anyone build something this large in a place this isolated? That mystery is part of what keeps people fascinated by it. The fortress feels abandoned and alive at the same time, like a forgotten military relic, still refusing to disappear beneath the Atlantic weather. Number 1. Mount Athos, Greece. On a remote peninsula in northern Greece lies one of the most restricted religious regions in the world. Mount Athos is not just a monastery or a historical site. It is an autonomous monastic community made up of ancient Orthodox monasteries built along cliffs, forests, and mountain slopes overlooking the Aegean Sea. For more than 1,000 years, strict rules controlled who could enter the region. Even today, access remains extremely limited, and women are entirely banned from entering the peninsula under a rule that has existed for centuries. Men who wish to visit must still receive official permission, and only a limited number are allowed each day. What makes Mount Athos so unusual is that it feels less like part of modern Europe and more like a preserved world operating under completely different laws and rhythms. Monks continue living according to traditions that survived empires, wars, and political changes across the continent. Ancient libraries, religious artifacts, hidden courtyards, and cliffside monasteries remain protected from mass tourism by the restrictions themselves. Seen from the sea, some of the monasteries appear almost impossible, hanging above rocky coastline with towers rising directly from the cliffs. The region values separation from the outside world, and that isolation became part of its identity. Unlike abandoned forbidden places shaped by disaster or contamination, Mount Athos is restricted by choice. It remains closed because the people living there believe distance protects what they built centuries ago. And that decision created one of the most mysterious places in Europe.